$1. Yeah, that's fine. Me and Bone Daddy and all my little clients here. Here to spend some time. Thank you for spending some time with me. And for being curious about the moon as ever. Happy full moon. Happy full moon in Pisces. Uh, Full moon in Pisces also with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, which, with a little meditation, makes me think, hear me out, makes me think of deviations from the timeline. In particle collision or in like string theory, the idea is, well, like in particle collision specifically, that they can only predict possibilities. So when these things collide, there's many other points of output potential, right? Or in string theory or in consciousness, every decision that you make is sort of a deviation from the path in some way, shape, or form. Some don't think that's, whether you want heads or tails or ketchup or mustard, but I do think that when we spend time on any of those decisions, there is a version of us that chose something else and is existing in a timeline and a reality where perhaps we did choose to do A, B, or C instead of what we did. I think also that we dream this often, right? So I think all of these energies in Pisces, Neptune and Saturn specifically, with this moon is very much about these decisions and the way they deviate from the timeline or other timelines that we can choose to step into because of our experience with them already or our knowledge with them already. Keep in mind that not everybody necessarily knows or believes in that they have ever that they have any kind of memory or consciousness outside of their present reality, which is also not true. But take that with what resonates, I suppose. To some, I think that will really resonate exactly as I put it. To others, consider the options of all of your choices and the things that you've learned from them and how that impacts your choices as you move forward. I do think some people are just maybe more open to subconscious or unconscious choices and their awareness of them. And that will change the way that you hear or understand that initial message. But not to lose you in the timelines, but I also think that those energies have a sort of direct adversary in, I guess not adversary per se, but there's an opposition there, so there's some tension with Mercury and Virgo, which I do think is very strict and compartmentalized communications. Think over explanation on unhealed ears, which is very funny because that's kind of what I just said. Sometimes people just won't hear because they can only meet you where they're at or hear what they're familiar with. Not all of us have been given the language to even ask the right questions, which is maybe where we find a little bit more compassion in that understanding, right? But so not just Mercury and Virgo, right? Pluto is back in Capricorn for a little while, and its adversary is Mars and Cancer, or opposing Mars and Cancer, right? And I think that speaks very much to rules and regulations and restrictions, corporal punishment even over compassion. I think that's the very rigid structuring that we are all feeling the anxiety and the pressure of in the to's and fro's and the swings of the systems that we live in or find ourselves upholding, or not. Because of Mars and Cancer, I also think that corporal over compassion or restriction or regulation can also overexert itself due to some insecurities. Um, when I contemplate this, it like I feel it in my solar plexus, and I think that very much speaks to identity, yes, but also your own truth, and maybe secrets that you hold, which isn't necessarily even just like, I know where the bodies are buried, but like the times that we say yes when we really want to say no, and the ways that that weighs, and it ultimately weighs on your shoulders, but the like insertion points of very integral muscles in your shoulders and in your neck uh, is much lower, sort of like behind the ribs and at the solar plexus, which is where this interesting feeling exists, right? But when we get aware of these things, we start to unearth our truth, and we start to unearth what that means for us. I feel like truth is a really difficult word to use outside of religious context, right? But sort of going back to the Saturn-Neptune thing, it's not so much, how do I explain this? There's something else that I posted recently too that was like, what if perfect timing did not mean perfect timing as in timing things well, like something Virgo would really want to do, Mercury and Virgo. What if it's more about the present moment? And what that came to me as is sort of understanding the plasmic glows around a singular star rather than the way all of those stars combine for a big picture, right? Like we sort of microscope versus the big shenanigans, or you know the stories that they tell in all these stars, and the pictures that they make in the grand scheme. If we were to just appreciate the essence and the ebb and the gaseousness and the viscosity around these individual stars, what could we gain from that? And that, I think, is very much like the present moment. And with that, I think that radiation, that plasmic viscosity, is a lot more about our truth than necessarily what we intellectualize or perform. It's much more about like the space in between the to and the fro, like the essence of you know, the means to the end rather than the end or the beginning itself, which is a very indigenous way to describe truth, or what some people would describe ultimately as God. The is the flow in between those things. It's sort of the consciousness flow of the universe, which the culture we live in today describes as God and still has trouble finding. There's also very much understandings of the quality, like the air itself as a particle quality, right? And a practice for embodiment in meditation, ironically, is to sort of acknowledge all of that in between space. So rather than just like I'm trying to be in my body, I would focus my attention on the crevices and the nuances of the corners of the room and the walls that are nearest me, or the surfaces that are nearest me, almost like I'm changing my acknowledgement of the particles around me and therefore re-spacing them, right? But because I become so aware, or because you can become so aware of that which is in between, you suddenly become more viscerally, like I don't know if it's like the cells in your skin become more viscerally excited by these understandings, and ironically, does feel like it's very much placing and inserting consciousness back into the body when it feels separate, or when it feels sort of erratic. I do this a lot when I feel faint, because in Chinese medicine, the idea of feeling faint often it can be explained by like a surplus of energy taken in, or an excess of energy pressed out too fast or pushed out too fast. Um, da, 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 da. Yeah, science and spirituality, eh? With that, what else? Blah blah blah. Pluto Capricorn. Oh, with that, with the Pluto Capricorn adversary Mars Cancer, there's an element of corporal punishment over compassion. However, a tethering line, if thou shalt not forget it, is Venus is in Libra. And I think that's very much the mitigator, the understanding of compassion, the understanding of that space in between, um, the understanding of what language needs to be used on unhealed ears to be heard. How does your message need to be received? Taking control back, I suppose, over that. Taking integrity and responsibility back, not control, is very much Venus and Libra's adding to this. However, it's an assistance that is offered if you seek it. It is not an assistance that is directly in the line of these communications between all of these planets, right? So it's kind of like that elder that is, off in the distance, that is like, you'll come when you realize that you need help, but I can't just step in and help you. It's the Hieronymus Bosch nun being in the world but not of it kind of deal, maybe. And I think understanding the balancing of, like I said, it's hard to talk about truth without it sort of pissing anybody's religion off, or being misdirected into one perception or the other. And in reality, reality is kind of a strange flowing thing based on your sensory perception. But when you become very aware of your sensory perception, you can litigate and mitigate that for yourself, without being directed or narrated by anyone else. This is one of my greatest fears, and perhaps why I love Catcher in the Rye, is to be an unreliable narrator. And I do think a lot of us are perhaps maybe more unreliable narrators than we would care to admit, which is why so many people hated that book, and why I hated it at first too, until I realized so much, and now I find it very valuable, a very valuable thing indeed. But especially if we're bouncing in between timelines or bouncing in between dreams, do not lose sight of your own reality. Do not lose sight of your truth, of your sensory truth. And that is not necessarily emotional, that is not necessarily just physical, but it can speak to you in that way. Absolutely. I just lost something else that I was going to say. When it comes to reality and sense of truth and your own connection with that, when you're very aware of these things, it's like this spectrum of, too much confidence becomes ego, too much humbleness becomes insecurity, right? Too much self-questioning and self-doubt, when you're like, I was pushed, and somebody else is like, I didn't push you, or like, you were stepping on my foot, and the other person's like, no, I'm not, da 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 da. If they continue to tell you that they're not, and that makes you question your sensory reality, like pushing back, it's like an energetic overwhelm, like a frequency that takes over and sort of cancels out. But if you are strong in your frequency, then you cannot be silenced or canceled out, right? Much like any good DJ. And I think that's something that people are very needy and desperate and want validation, for very real and tender reasons, absolutely. But that can come in pushing energy, um, and sort of exerting yourself frequentially. I call them energy bullies, because they don't really have the language to understand that they're just overexerting and sort of, you know, sucking all the air out of the room. But if you are very aware and in tune with your reality, then no matter how many times they tell you that they're not, you still be very in tune with your sensory self and be able to not be pulled into their reality or into another reality or into, you know, another way of being. And you know, maybe this exists in friendships or relationships or otherwise, but I do think in a macro scale, the, you know, communities we get involved in, the circles that we run with, the parties that we pick, and the systems that may or may not structure our futures, governmentally or what have you, I think are often pushing a narrative. I think the worst gaslighter any of us has ever met has been the American government, that often pushes us into a narrative, or into a new way of being, or a new way of thinking, or a new way of understanding the situation as is. And I think we've all seen that in many different forms in the last few years. But when you're very aware of your own needs, your own wants, your own desires, your own integral truth, then it can't gaslight you out of your own reality. It's a matter of being tethered to your truth. And that's not to victim shame or say that nobody can be gaslit. It happens to the best of us. But I think that moment that we realize, like, oh shit, this isn't good for me, is when we do get reacquainted with our own truth and realize that we have been guesting characters in somebody else's story. So, be very clear about your presence in yourself, not your performance. Your presence in yourself and your presence in your current timeline or your desired timeline, preferably your desired timeline, maybe, especially in this transition. Be very clear about it as to not get lost in time, because I feel like much more than a string, it is more like a soup, like a sticky soup. So we pull cards. Oof, I love that. Clear as ever. All right. Much like we are hanging out together in my wonderful little space, and there are cards in between us, we'll make ourselves available for whatever the full moon has to offer. Show me. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Ooh, okay. I get the sense there's going to be an interesting pivot of circumstances or needs. It kind of burns, honestly. It feels like a funny bone, like very pivoted motion, but it also kind of burns in places where we have faith, in places where we communicate with that faith, in places where we find safety. If you're feeling burned where you should be feeling safe, maybe it's time to reevaluate. But also, if that is leading to you burning bridges with your relationship with yourself, or with, you know, that sense of clarity with yourself, or what you're feeling or how you're navigating. Question those structures. Um, just just ask questions. Any good, strong, sturdy, safe space or theological pillar um, can be broken down and built back up again. This is the essence of the Tower card. It it provokes strength. It provokes stability and a very clear and tight and well placed, um, very I guess like landscaped, a very artfully masoned kind of space can be broken down and built up again. That's a stronger structure. That's the key to all of these things really interweaving. I think that's maybe how any writer really weaves tropes is through all of these threads, you know. Um, I do think, again, America gaslights us. Religion can gaslight us. Friends can gaslight us. The world is trying to create a new narrative. If that does not align with your integrity, be very clear about why. A lot of people are not going to be aligned in their integrity because of it, because it's because of insecurity. It's because of a fascist fear of annihilation. Do not embrace that sense in you. Do not become your own fascist fear of not enough and of annihilation within yourself. That is not the highest timeline or desired timeline that is currently accessible at this moment. So consider the possibilities. Consider the possibilities of navigating upward and outright. Ooh, lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Four of Cups, bottom of the deck. A lot of intensity, a lot of tides moving, a lot of heavy waves, which is interesting because I have very much felt that, and I feel like in the world around me, I see a lot of people, you know, diving headfirst into change, you know, really pulling the trigger on a lot of moments so that they can, you know, pivot in their own timeline and see change and what have you. However, with the Four of Cups, it's a dam too, and there's really no stopping. It's a dam that's breaking. There's no stopping change. Whether or not you dive into it, just don't run from it, and allow it to wash over you. And it's a lot like sitting with your feelings. It's a lot like, you know, when you have high intensity emotions, sitting and journaling about it, sitting and really accessing all of the subconscious nuances to what's going on in your mind, so you can get very clear about what is insecurity, what is, you know, grief kind of guiding you down another way, what is, you know, survival need or lack, or, you know, colonial mechanisms that are actually sort of, you know, winding you up, rather than you moving through truth and integrity and flow and moving with the universe, or moving with spirit, or whatever positive universal consciousness you acknowledge. I guess positive isn't necessarily the word for a non-dual perspective either. But you know what I mean. I have to say too, with this Four of Cups, oftentimes we bottle things up because we feel like we're stuck in between a rock and a hard place, or like circumstances, you know, won't abide freedom of movement or what have you. What did I say earlier about compartmentalized communication? Um, but I think that can also be kind of a fallacy. For instance, in a lot of the ways that I hear two-party system, as if we've never been able to avert third party. Uh, it's a false binary. It's a false binary that perpetuates itself in the same way communism and fascism do. They are two ends of a spectrum that are constantly oscillating. Or they are one point on a circle that is constantly finding itself again, or eating its own tail, the Ouroboros. And when you start to understand that there's always a tertiary solution that we just have not thought of yet, we have not allowed ourselves to think outside of the box, then absolutely. We start to relieve the dam outside of those rock and hard place circumstances or walls. What else was I going to say about that? Rock and hard place circumstances. It'll come to me. Oh, ionization, release, relief, higher viscosity. There's so much more information to be had. I mean, you're supposed to go outside after it rains because, there's something in the air that makes it easier to breathe. It's good to breathe, da-da-da-da. The same is true at the tip of waterfalls, right? And this is the combustion of communication and all of its possibilities, right? Ideally, we don't want to crash, but bear with me. If all of this is emotions and it's all building up, then ultimately it pops, it crashes, the dam breaks. The water hits a new surface and creates all of this other stuff, right? Not that that's a bad thing. We want more awareness of it, is all. Because water can be very destructive, but it can also be beautiful and tender, right? And mesmerizing and peaceful and calming. Not just, hurricanes and drowning. And again, it's not all like deep, dark secrets and, tell me about that time that, somebody said the worst thing to you or something, right? It's definitely a combination of, yes, that, if that is still something that needs to be dealt with, but also all of the times that we lie to ourselves and say we can't, all of the times that we lie to ourselves and say, oh, I'm not that good, or reject compliments, or shy away from acknowledgement, I suppose. All of the times that we, give benefit of the doubt or give chances when we know that that's not where that that's not what's needed or what's necessary, or what ultimately takes more advantage of the situation. It's the weight of, sure, yeah, when you really just like don't fucking wanna, and or have a bad feeling about it or what have you, and will reveal a lot to you, because if you say no to a friend, suddenly you're not a friend anymore. If you say, and that's not good friends. That's not good friends. Let's be clear about that. If you thought this person was a friend until you said no and they pushed back, then that is not a friend. Or that is not somebody that, even on a baseline, that is not somebody that respects you. In which case, respect yourself and don't bottle those things up and allow them to be freely acknowledged so that it can flow back into its ecosystem. So you can connect, rather than like dam up your rivers, connect the rivers to the oceans. Is what I'm seeing there. Rather than isolation, different community, perhaps. Rather than isolation, find different community. Okay, that's all bottom of the deck. So that all governs the Devil, Five of Wands, and the Hermit. which, ironic, I said, rather than isolation, and the hermit pops out, but the hermit isn't uh, isolated in the sense of like, keep me away from society. I have a sense that the hermit is actually more so understanding of people's own willingness and responsibility to help themselves. If the hermit were at City Hall, he would have a line wrapped around the block 10 times over, I'm sure. So, in order, and nobody would really take those things seriously. I do the same thing with my tarot readings. You know, some people charge an astronomical amount of money. Some people don't, but they charge, right? I think at the end of the day, such an experience, such a communication, such a catalyst, such a validator, maybe, is invaluable, is priceless, in fact. And if it's so priceless that at the end of the day, you can spend $1 million on it, and if you don't care, or if you're not invested in it, then it doesn't mean anything. Then it's not going to ensure anything. In the same way as reading a particle collision, it reads your potentiality, it reads the frequency of the moment, right? And if you had nothing, but rather than, you know what, tangible fucking presidential dollar bill, you sacrificed, you know, something that you knew that you liked, but you knew was holding you back. You know, the way that you were going to you know, pay spirit for this guidance was in, you know, not drinking anymore, or in, you know, offering something to somebody nice because, or offering something nice to somebody regardless of if they're nice, to, you know, give back and be selfless, or, you know, sacrificing time to, you know, actually plot and plan these things. However involved in that moment you are, that is where that value really begins to take place. So at the end of the day, 100%, it's only as valuable as you make it. And I think that's very true of what the hermit understands about this, the help that he offers. If he offers it to everybody, and it's easy, and it's within, you know, easily within their means, even if it's, you know, it's only $20 readings or whatever, those aren't those don't necessarily get taken to heart. But also people bypass the work because they spent $200 on a reading or whatever, and expect it to be results, like they're paying for a more expensive surgeon or something. And so to avoid that and allow people to step into their own integrity and step into their own willingness to act with these things, the hermit takes himself farther away from the situation so that he can be in the world but not of it, so he can observe, and still offer, but so that you can gain the sense you need to ask for his help or guidance in general. And that is something that is very particularly different than isolation. It's not isolation, it's just value of your own time and effort, and quite honestly, yeah, value of spirit, value of this connection. It's priceless, really. In the same way that, you know, some crystals are very common, but when you find them in the moment and there's a story and a memory attached to it, your, you know, quartz from a lively river has a heartbeat, rather than, you know, the one you bought online from some shop that was probably mined by a 6-year-old. The difference is, all that to say, I don't think the hermit's very judgy either. I think he just wants people to be able to not judge themselves, but help themselves. Judging people doesn't help them. Um, and so maybe that's also why he takes himself out of the out of the main scope. Um, which, ooh, there's stars at this path here too. Which brings me back to the beginning when I said rather than constellations for the big picture, what is the relationship of this individual star? What is its glow? What is its essence? What is its frequency? What is its sound? You know, the same is true of planets. You know, what's your ruling planet? What does it sound like? Can you make that sound? I think the Hermit's very invested in that kind of work. And so that's become more company than people that are unwilling to help themselves. As much as I say that I think even terrible people are capable of redemption, not everybody is interested in redemption. And so that is a very stark deviation from a bridge of compassion. That's where somebody jumped off. Let's see. The Devil and the Four of Wands. Where do we build bridges and where do we jump off? The Five of Wands is very much confinement, compartmentalization, feeling trapped maybe. But how do these things structure us? I think that's because the structuring comes from the outside in, and that weighs us down a lot. That is a lot to hold up, especially if we're not fully aware of the structuring of our bodies, right? But if you structure your life from the inside out, then everything else becomes balanceable weight, like a tightrope walker with, I don't know, poi or dishes stacked on either side, right? Consider it that way. If we're taking too much to the shoulders, how stable are our feet? And I mean that in a very literal way, but also in a very metaphorical way. If the structuring of the world around us feels so heavy, how are we structuring our world from the inside out that can contrast and alleviate or fight against? I guess preferably not agitate, but sometimes you need agitators to create equilibrium. To create equilibrium within any structure, and I think that also meets directly in the solar plexus again. Tree of life, tree of death, ancestry, roots, higher knowledge, yada yada yada. And I think for the last few years, most people have really spent time on higher knowledge and ego, and maybe not enough into root systems, mycelium structures, land acknowledgement, body trauma, mapping your scars, mapping your stretch marks, mapping your, not just your ancestry, maybe your timelines, other versions of yourself that you've acknowledged. What is the Westgate version of you? What is the Northgate version of you? What are the ebbing and flowing sides of you? Much like a wheat plant, when I get too hot, I change genders. And so I've also been able to experience both sides of that in meditation as well. The Devil is here to remind us what we are connected to. Again, how present are you in your desired timeline or highest timeline? Or how present are you in your own hell? The things we choose to attach to, or the things we choose, or that we feel so tethered to. I don't think it's always like a cognitive decision of like, this is what I want because it hurts so good. But is this what's necessary? Is this what's needed? And oftentimes connection to a lot of those things based out of fear. even in a grand scheme, you know, politically, I think a lot of people are going to be thwarted into like, oh, well, I think a lot of people are already thwarted into, you know, oh, well, you know, I'm so scared about A option that I guess I have to pick B option. No, no, you don't. No, you don't. In any situation, there is always a tertiary solution that has just not been considered yet, and that is the result of any particle collision, regardless of our preconceived notions or anticipations. And the hermit is very separate from those things. Again, all about presence. There are no preconceived notions, there are no anticipations. It's not about the past haunting, it's not about the present or the future looming. It doesn't even exist in that directional linear timeline. What if the past informed us more about the future? Anyway, what if we weren't just looking into the horizon for eternity, as if that was the future? Think about it. Journal about it. Tell me what you're going with. Alright. All of this talk about time. We'll pull some numbers. See how they relate. Perhaps we focus on our desired timeline as the moon illuminates it. Like a reading lamp, so close. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Ooh. Okay, there's a lot more distribution. There's less burning. It's more like a comforting, warming. And there's much more in. I don't feel like it's necessarily like direct communication, but yes, and also sort of a reaching out. Your ability to listen and hear by example. It often sets a good example, and I think the more that we listen to ourselves, the more we inadvertently set example for those around us, and it becomes an offering to the world. Showing up for yourself kind of becomes an offering to the earth, to the world, to, you know, the vibe of the fucking room, really. And I think when all the other particles are wondering what to follow, they see one that is present in its own timeline, or, you know, being a strange little matter or what have you, and can change things, can change the direction that those other particles want to follow, I think. And that's very much leading by design, uh, which is just to walk in truth, to walk in beauty, to speak and walk in integrity. And you don't have to look behind you to know that people will follow. You don't have to research or question that. It will just occur. And I think that's also the very clear difference in a lot of the thought leaders today that are creating cult followings through manipulative tactics rather than just integrity and honesty. I don't know why it works so well. Sometimes I wonder if people really just like being lied to. And some people really just like lying. Like I said, not everybody's interested in redemption. Not everybody wants a redemption arc. Depending on the way that we connect these dots, we can create new pictures entirely our own. Depending on the conversations that we have, we create new bridges all their own. It's a lot like, again, all of these individual stars have been dubbed these, specific pictures for whatever reasons. And there are many stories. Orion's belt is these, line of stars. Da 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 da. It looks like this. It looks like that. But have you ever, as a child, looked up at the stars or at the sky or at the clouds and been like, that one looks like this and that one looks like this, and sort of created these stories, these interactive, imaginative stories around them? It's very much a similar thing. I won't say exactly because there is a lot of mythologies and what have you around the stars. But the idea is creativity. The idea is creation. When we play these games with our imaginations, we become co-creators in the universe. And so I think very much when we begin to look at the present moment as this, as again, that glow around the star, it becomes its own magnet and sort of, draws more eyes to the same picture, and that's where we get our constellations, right? This is community that happens naturally. This is, circles of friends that found each other really young because they were so goofy and strange, and created this, very wonderful, pleasant life for themselves and for each other in their relationship as they grew. These are the ways we create a thriving, fulfilling relationship with the day and with the world when we have these fun imagination games and possibilities, and when we see the world as bigger than us, and when we see ourselves as part of the story. Ultimately, however you find that, however playful it may be, it's how you play the game. And we are, in fact, so playing a fucking game. And who are you playing with? Who are you playing with, and how does that reinforce your gaming experience, I suppose? Everybody's played with somebody, but it's not fun to play with, right? King of Clubs is very much premonitory of the highest timeline, or the desired timeline aspect, or really recognizing the possibilities of these other timelines that exist. I heard a friend of mine say, actually, once even, when a friend of ours passed away, that in another timeline that perhaps that they were together. And this is what I mean. There was a comforting thought in that moment. I'm sure that as proceeded to be a comforting thought. But also the playfulness of understanding any decisions we did or did not make do exist still in the ether. I feel like this king is very cognizant of that, and is also, I think, very much manicuring and taking inventory of the highest timeline or desired timeline that will take over our sense or reality, right? We can very well gaslight ourselves on being like, you're so and find ourselves believing it shortly in the future, right? Not to say fake it till you make it, because I'm not really into, fakeness as a personality trait. But when you take inventory of your life, you're starting with gratitude, right? What do you have? What do you love? What are you grateful for? Starting on a positive note, starting with magnetism, right? And sort of an understanding of all that space, again, that is in between you and all of the things that maybe aren't even a tangible have, but are an ethereal and a fulfilling have in the space that you take up in life, right? Following that can also be really narrowing down things that you loved doing but haven't made time for lately, or people that you love seeing but haven't made time for lately, or hobbies that you really, really wanted to do but for some reason or another did not stay with. A lot of times it's like, I really wanted to learn how to play guitar, but I just got made fun of or didn't believe I could, or my parents told me that I could never, or I really wanted to act but my parents told me that was stupid. Whatever it is, those things, there is a timeline where they didn't tell you you were stupid, or where they did lift you up in that, or where you said F that and did it anyway and became like a famous rock star. Whatever it is, separate timelines, and when you get very very into the things that you do have and fill that space and create magnetism, then you can really, really let the universe and yourself understand that these are things that you still want, and acknowledge why you feel deprived of them, so that you can give yourself those things, rather than continue depriving yourself, just because it has happened before. These are the strange, quirks of the world, bouncing in and out of realities. You just have to grab it by the horns and look it in the eye and remind yourself that it's you. Or conversely, with problematic patterns, grab it by the horns and remind yourself that, and look it in the eye and remind yourself that it is not you anymore. And that was a version of you that you heard and understood and helped heal, and can now lay it to rest. All right, that's all I got for you. That's the best way I can end it. Honestly, I love you. I wish you well on this wicked, wicked roller coaster. And may your understanding only broaden so that you can see how all of these things have their part to play, and it can empower you to play with even more presence and enthusiasm. Alas, party on. Happy full moon.